knew it. Know it, I once worked here. They went in. There was an old gentleman sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he would have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge quite cried out in excitement, "Why, it's Fezziwig! It's Fezziwig alive again!" Mr. Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his coat, and laughed all over himself from his shoes to his belly, and called out in a jolly voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer! Dick!" A young man who was Scrooge's former self hurried into the room with another young man. "Dick Wilkins," Scrooge said. "My old fellow worker. Dear, dear." "Yo-ho, my boys," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick? Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shades up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here." Clear away they did. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away for old Fezziwig. Everything movable was packed off, the floor swept, the lamps were turned up, and coal was heaped on the fire. The warehouse was as snug and warm and dry a ballroom as you could hope to see on a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and he sat at a tall desk. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, smiling happily. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs and their boyfriends. In came all the young men and women who worked for the Fezziwigs. They all came, one after another, and all night they danced down the floor and back again as the fiddler played. There were cakes and eggnog and plenty to drink. It was a happy evening, and everyone danced and ate to their heart's content. When the clock struck 11, the ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig stood by the door, shaking hands with every person as they went out, wishing them each a Merry Christmas. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks happy. He really hasn't spent that much money." "It isn't that," said Scrooge, still speaking like his former self. "He has the power to make us unhappy or happy, to make our jobs easier or harder. His power lies in being kind and thoughtful and doing nice things for all who work for him. So you see, Spirit, the happiness he gives is just as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular." "Something, I think," said the ghost. "No," said Scrooge. "No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That is it." "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick!" Again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. He was not alone, but sat at the side of a fair young girl in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly. "Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" said young Scrooge. "A golden one. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you, have I not?" "What then?" Scrooge retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you. Am I?" She shook her head. "Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until we could improve our worldly fortunes. You are changed, Ebenezer. When it was made, you were another man. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it, and therefore I can release you." "Have I ever sought release?" "In words, no, never. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl? You who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain. I do, and I release you, with a full heart for the love of him you once were." He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. "May you be happy in the life you've chosen, Ebenezer." She left him, and they parted. "Spirit," said Scrooge, "show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? I told you these were the shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. But they are what they are. Don't blame me. Remove me, spirit. I cannot bear it. One shadow more, said this ghost. No more. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer. Suddenly Scrooge found himself back in his own bedroom. He stumbled into bed and immediately sunk to a fast sleep. Stage 3, the second of the three spirits. Scrooge awoke in his own bedroom. There was no doubt about that, but there was a great light coming from his sitting room. He put on his slippers and timidly shuffled in to see what was causing it. The walls and the ceiling were hung so with green branches that it looked like a forest. The merriest blaze roared up the chimney that the old fireplace had known for many a winter, and heaped upon the floor was formed a kind of throne where turkeys, geese, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of chestnuts, and great bowls of punch. Upon this throne sat a smiling giant, who held a glowing torch raised high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. Come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. You have never seen anyone like me before, I dare say. Never, spirit. Spirit, take me where you will. I'm ready to learn what you will show me. Touch my robe. Scrooge did as he was told. The room and its contents all vanished, and they stood before the house of Scrooge's clerk, Bob Cratchit, on a snowy Christmas morning. Mrs. Cratchit was dressed in a poorly patched gown, but in her hair she wore bright ribbons. She set the table, helped by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters. Master Peter Cratchit wore one of his father's shirts, which was much too large for him, and now the two smaller Cratchits, a boy and a girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelled the goose, oh, their very own goose. What is keeping your precious father, said Mrs. Cratchit, and your brother Tiny Tim, and Martha? Oh, here's Martha, mother, cried the youngest Cratchits, who were watching out the window. Oh, bless your heart, my dear, how late you are, said Mrs. Cratchit. But never mind, now you're here. Sit down before the fire, my dear, and warm yourself up. No, there's father coming, cried the youngest Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hide, Martha, hide! So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob, with at least 3 feet of scarf wrapped around him, and his threadbare clothes were patched and brushed. Tiny Tim was perched upon his shoulder. Oh, poor Tiny Tim. He held a little crutch, and on his legs he wore an iron brace. Why, where's our Martha? Cried Bob, looking around. Not coming, said Mrs. Cratchit. Not coming, said Bob, suddenly looking very sad. Not coming on Christmas Day? Just then Martha popped out from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the youngest Cratchits carried Tiny Tim off into the kitchen so that he could hear the pudding bubbling in the pan. And how did little Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit when Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. As good as gold, said Bob. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much. He told me that he hoped people saw him in church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember on Christmas Day, he who made cripples walk and blind men see. Before another word was spoken, Tiny Tim was brought back by his siblings to his stool beside the fire. Master Peter and the 2 young Cratchits went after the goose, and they soon returned with it held high for all to see. Now Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Peter mashed the potatoes, Belinda sweetened up the applesauce, while Martha dusted the plates and Bob put Tiny Tim beside him at a corner of the table. At last everything was ready and grace was said. Now Bob said he didn't believe that there ever was such a goose cooked. Everyone bragged on its tenderness, flavor, and size. Indeed, with applesauce and potatoes, there was enough dinner for the whole family. Now Mrs. Cratchit looked at the one small bite left upon the dish, and said with great delight that they hadn't even left the room to bring in the pudding. In half a minute she proudly entered with the pudding, as firm as a speckled cannonball, blazing in a tiny measure of brandy and crowned with holly. Oh, what a wonderful pudding, said Bob. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for such a large family. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done, the table cleared, and the hearth swept. Apples and oranges were put out upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts were put on the fire. Bob served the punch with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered noisily. Soon Bob proposed a toast. "A Merry Christmas to you all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family repeated. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his stool, while Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he dreaded that Tiny Tim might be taken from him far too soon. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will die." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "No, no," said Scrooge. "Oh, kind spirit, say he will be spared." "If the shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here." "To Mr. Scrooge," said Bob. "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "Oh, the founder of the feast indeed," said Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here right now. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear, the children, Christmas Day," said Bob. "It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks to the health of such an odious, stingy, hard-feeling man as Mr. Scrooge. Oh, you know he is Robert. Nobody knows it better than you." "My dear," said Bob, "it's Christmas Day." "I'll drink to his health for your sake and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit, "not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. That was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care. 2 pence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of this family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. Now the Cratchits were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed, nor were their shoes polished. Their clothes were scanty, but they were happy and grateful and pleased with one another, and when the room began to fade away, Scrooge had his eye on Tiny Tim until the last. "Look," whispered Scrooge, "they're starting. Let's stay a bit longer, Spirit." It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what it was, he only answering to their questions yes or no, as the case may be. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, a rather disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted and talked sometimes and lived in London and walked about the streets. And it wasn't made a show of, and it wasn't led by anybody. It didn't live in a menagerie and was never killed in a market. And it was not a horse, a bear, a cow, a bull, a tiger, a dog, a pig, a cat, or an ass. At every fresh question that was put to him, Fred burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and he was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last his sister-in-law, falling into a similar state, cried out, "I have found it out! I know what it is, Fred! I know what it is!" "Well, what is it?" said Fred. "It's your Uncle Scrooge!" Which it most certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected to the reply, "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes. "Now, Uncle Scrooge has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure," said Fred, "and it would be ungrateful to not drink to his health. Here is a glass of mulled wine ready to our hand at the moment, and I say to Uncle Scrooge, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever and wherever he may be. He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless, to Uncle Scrooge." Suddenly the scene changed again, and Scrooge and the Spirit were once more upon their travels. As they stood together in an open space, a church bell rang out. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, but it was gone. At this he remembered that Jacob Marley had said that there would be a third ghost. Lifting up his eyes, he saw a phantom whose face was hidden by a dark hood, coming across the ground toward him.
Yeah.
Stave 4, the last of the spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon one knee, for in this very air, though, which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing visible, save one outstretched hand. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. "I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come," said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. "You are about to show me the shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit? Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me, spirit?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. Lead on, spirit. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to be springing up about them and encompass them through its own act. But there they were in the heart of it. The spirit stopped beside one of the little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." "Well, when did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." What was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first with a yawn. "Well, what has he done with his money?" "I haven't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning yet again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. I know he hasn't left it to me. That's all I know." Now Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit would attach importance to conversations, apparently so trivial. But feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob Marley, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost province was the future. He looked about for himself, but though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he could not see himself among the crowd that walked up and down the street. Now this didn't surprise Scrooge, however, for he had already made up his mind to change his way of life. He supposed this to be the reason for not being in his old place at this hour. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town, where Scrooge had never penetrated before, though he recognized its situation and its bad repute. Far in this den of infamous resort and iniquity, there was a low-browed shop where old rags, bottles, and greasy rubbish were bought and sold. Sitting in amongst the wares was a grey-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who smoked his pipe in luxury. Now Scrooge and the Phantom arrived just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. She had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was followed closely by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, the old man with the pipe joined them and laughed her. "Let the charwoman alone be the first," cried she, who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone be the second, and let the undertaker's man be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "You all come here often enough. What have you got to sell? What have you got to sell?" "Wait a minute, Joe, and you shall see." Now Joe went down on his knees to make it easier to open the bundles, and dragged out a large, heavy roll of some dark fabric. "What are these?" "Bed curtains." "Yes, bed curtains. Now don't drop the oil from the lamp upon the blankets now." "His blankets?" "Now who else's do you think? He isn't likely to catch a cold without them, I dare say. If he wanted to keep them after he was dead, the wicked old sinner, wasn't he a better man in his lifetime?
If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone by himself. Now, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. They'd have wasted it too if it hadn't been for me.
What do you call wasting of it? Asked old Joe.
Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, cried Mrs. Dilber with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a gentleman, it ain't good enough for anything. It's as quite becoming as to the body. Now, he can't look uglier than he did in that one.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heavens, what is this? He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and he now almost touched a bed. A bare, uncurtained bed. The pale moonlight fell upon this bed, and on it, unwatched and uncared for, was the body of the robbed, unknown man. Let me see some tenderness connected with a death, said Scrooge, or that dark chamber spirit which we just left will forever be present to me. The ghost conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, where he had visited before, and he found the mother and children seated round the fire. Mrs. Cratchit laid her sewing upon the table and put her hand up to her face. The colour hurts my eyes, she said. They're better now again. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time, after all. Past it, rather, Peter answered. But I think he has walked a little slower than he used to these last few evenings. I've known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed. And so have I, said Peter. And so have I, said Martha. Oh, but he was very light to carry, and your father loved him so, he was no trouble. And there is your father at the door. Mrs. Cratchit hurried out to meet him, and little Bob, in his scarf, came in. His tea was ready for him on the fire, and they all tried who should help him to it most. The two youngest Cratchits got upon his knees, and each laid a little cheek against his face, as if to say, Don't mind your father, don't be sad.
Here, we're gonna keep walking.
Bob was cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. Sunday? You went today then, Robert? Yes, my dear, returned Bob. I wish you could have gone. It would have done good to see how green a place it is. Oh, but you'll see it often, I promised that. I promised that I would walk there on a Sunday. Oh, my little child. My little child. Bob broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. He had loved Tiny Tim. So. The family drew about the fire and talked. The girls and mother working still. Bob told him of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day and seeing that he looked a little, well, just a little bit down, Bob said, inquired what had happened to distress him. On which, said Bob, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you have ever heard, I told him I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, he said, and heartily sorry for your good life. If I can be of service to you in any way, he said, giving me his card, that's where I live. Pray come to me. Now it wasn't, said Bob, for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way that he was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, cried Mrs. Cratchit. You would be sure of it, my dear, returned Bob, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be surprised at all. Mark what I say, if he got Peter a better working situation. Now only hear that, Peter, said Mrs. Cratchit. There's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us. Spirit, said Scrooge. Something tells me that our visit is nearly over. Tell me who that man was, with the covered face whom we saw lying dead. The ghost of Christmas present took him to a deserted graveyard. The ghost of Christmas yet to come took him to a deserted graveyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to 1. Before I move closer to that headstone, Spirit, that headstone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of the things that may be only? Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead, said Scrooge. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I the man that lay upon that bed? No, Spirit. Oh, no, no, Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been, but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope? For the first time, the hand appeared to shake. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three will strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may erase away the writing on the stone, Spirit. In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free himself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reserved, Scrooge saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk and collapsed and dwindled down into a bedpost. Day 5, the end of it all. The bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three will strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, Jacob, on my knees. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying at the same time. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. Oh, I am giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas, everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there, oh, hello. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, just a clear, bright, golden day. What's today? Cried Scrooge to a boy down on the street. Today? Why, it's Christmas Day, sir. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything. No, of course they can. The spirits. Of course they can. Of course they can. Oh, hello, my fine fellow. Hello, said the boy. Do you know the butcher's on the next street? Not the one on the next, but the one at the corner. Why, I should hope I did. An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging there in the window? Not the little prize turkey, but the big one. Well, the one as big as me? What a delightful boy. Yes, my buck. Why, it's hanging there now. Is it, said Scrooge. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I will give you half a crown. Now the boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. He wrote down the address and went upon the street to be ready for the butcher when he came. Oh, what a turkey it was! Scrooge had never seen such a bird and rubbed his hands with glee as he watched the man taking it to Bob Cratchit's. He dressed himself in all his best and at last got out into the streets. Walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant that people smiled back and said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the happy sounds he had ever heard, those were the happiest of all. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew Fred's house. "Is your master home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl who opened the door. "Yes, sir." "Where is he, my love?" said Scrooge. "Well, he's in the dining room, along with mistress." "Thank you, he knows me," said Scrooge. "I'll go in, my dear." Fred, said Scrooge. Why, bless my soul, said Fred. Who could this be? It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Well, let him in. It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. Scrooge was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did all the guests when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful happiness. But Scrooge was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the thing he had set his heart for. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. 1/2. He was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Now Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the office. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. His scarf too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with a pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," said Scrooge in his accustomed voice. "What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir," said Cratchit. "I am behind my time." "You are? Well, yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday." "Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," Scrooge continued, leaping from a stool and making Bob stumble backwards, "therefore, I am about to raise your salary." Oh, Bob trembled and got nearer to the door. "Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I intend to raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop. Bob, bake up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Now Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he became a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew. Now some people laughed to see the change upon him, but he let him laugh. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. Now he had no further intercourse with the spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, as if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May they truly be said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening and sharing in my uncle's ghostly adventure. Have a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year.